My parents handed my sister the deed to our family's investment property because my success made me invisible to their needs. 5 years later, she bankrupted them, and they came to me for a bailout, unaware that I had already purchased the foreclosure debt myself. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The call came on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, relentless Tuesday that feels like it's actively trying to wear you down. I was lying in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic and floor wax filling my nose, nursing a postoperative incision that throbbed in time with my heartbeat. It wasn't a life-threatening surgery, just an appendectomy that had gone slightly complicated, but it was enough to leave me feeling small, fragile, and desperate for comfort. My phone buzzed on the plastic tray table. The screen lit up with the name Dad. I remember smiling. I actually smiled. In my morphine-hazed optimism, I thought, finally, they heard I was in the hospital. They're calling to check on me. I reached for the phone, wincing as the movement pulled at my stitches. "Hey, Dad," I rasped, my voice thick with exhaustion. "I'm okay," the doctor said. "Megan, listen, we don't have a lot of time. I'm at the notary's office," Peter interrupted. His voice wasn't concerned. It was brisk, businesslike, and slightly annoyed, as if I had kept him waiting. "Your mother and I are finalizing the transfer of the Lakeview cottage. We need to know if you have the key to the back shed, or if we need to call a locksmith to change the barrels." I blinked, the phone feeling heavy and cold against my ear. The silence in the hospital room suddenly felt oppressive. The cottage?" I asked, confused. "Why are you transferring the cottage? Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," Peter said, and I could hear the rustle of papers in the background. I could hear my mother, Willow, murmuring something low and soothing to someone else, probably Chloe. "We're signing the deed over to Chloe today. We want to get it settled before the fiscal year ends for tax purposes." My breath hitched, causing a sharp spike of pain in my side. "You're giving the cottage to Chloe." "Megan, don't start," he snapped, anticipating a fight I hadn't even gathered the strength to pick yet. "We've discussed this. Chloe needs the asset base to launch her lifestyle brand. The banks won't touch her without collateral. You have your firm, you have your apartment in the city, you have your stability. You don't need the help. Chloe does." "I'm in the hospital, Dad," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I had surgery yesterday." There was a pause, a brief, hollow silence that lasted perhaps 3 seconds. "Oh," he said. The tone wasn't one of shock or horror. It was the tone of someone who had just been told it was raining when they wanted to go play golf, mild inconvenience. "Well, you have good insurance, Megan. You're sensible. Look, about the key. Do you have it?" I closed my eyes, hot tears leaking out and sliding into my hairline. The physical pain of the incision was nothing compared to the sudden, cavernous hollowing out of my chest. It wasn't just about the property. The Lakeview cottage was where I had spent every summer working odd jobs to pay for my own textbooks while Chloe slept until noon. It was the place I had painted, the roof I had helped shingle one blistering July. "I don't have the key," I lied. My voice was trembling, but he didn't notice, or he didn't care. "Fine, we'll drill the lock. Talk later, Megan, rest up." The line went dead. I stared at the ceiling, the phone slipping from my grip onto the sheets. The betrayal wasn't just in the financial loss, it was in the absolute erasure of my existence as a person who might need care. I was the strong one, the self-sufficient one, and therefore I had ceased to be a daughter. I was just a resource they didn't need to maintain. That afternoon, as the anesthesia wore off and the sharp clarity of pain set in, I realized something fundamental. They hadn't just given away a house, they had given away my place in the family. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The weeks following the surgery were a blur of physical recovery and emotional calcification. I didn't go home to my parents to recover. I didn't ask them for help with groceries or laundry. I hired a nurse for 2 days, and then I managed on my own. It was a grim confirmation of their assessment. I was self-sufficient. But they didn't understand that self-sufficiency isn't a lack of need. It's a callus formed over the places where nobody helped you. 3 weeks later, I was back on my feet, albeit moving slower than usual. That was when I was summoned, not invited, summoned to the family home for a celebratory dinner. I debated not going. My thumb hovered over the decline button on the invite text from Willow. But curiosity, that dark, masochistic impulse to see the wreckage, pulled me in. I needed to see them. I needed to see if there was any guilt. When I arrived, the house was filled with the smell of roasting lamb, my favorite, though I suspected they had forgotten that and cooked it because Chloe liked the mint jelly. Chloe was holding court in the living room. At 29, she still carried herself with the chaotic energy of a teenager who believes the world owes her an audience. She was wearing a designer silk kaftan that I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, holding a glass of expensive red wine. "It's going to be a retreat space," Chloe was saying to Peter and Willow, who sat on the sofa looking at her with rapturous adoration. "Not just a rental, a sanctuary. I'm going to curate experiences. Yoga on the dock, farm-to-table dinners. The cottage is just the vessel. The brand is the soul." Peter nodded sagely, as if she were explaining nuclear fusion. "Brilliant, Chloe, just brilliant. This is exactly why we wanted you to have it. Megan's mind is too linear for this. She understands bricks, not vibes." I stood in the doorway, my grip tightening on my purse strap. "Bricks keep the roof from collapsing on the vibes, Dad," I said, stepping into the room. The room went quiet. Willow looked up, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before she smoothed it into a welcoming smile. "Megan, you made it. You look, well, fully recovered." "Recovering," I corrected, walking over to pour myself a water. I noticed the wine bottle on the table. It was a vintage from the cellar I had stocked for them last Christmas. "So, the deed is done." "Signed, sealed, and delivered," Chloe beamed, raising her glass to me. "I know you're probably super jealous, Meg, but honestly, you don't have the time for a project like this. You're always so busy with your corporate stuff. This needs a human touch." "The cottage was fully renovated 3 years ago," I said calmly, taking a seat in the armchair furthest from them. "I oversaw the contractors myself. It doesn't need a project manager. It needs maintenance." "That's small thinking," Chloe waved a hand dismissively. "I'm taking out a small equity loan against the value, just to modernize, open up the floor plan, knock down some walls." My stomach dropped. "You're leveraging the house already." "It's an investment, Megan," Peter interjected sharply. "You have to spend money to make money. Chloe has a vision." "And who is co-signing this loan?" I asked, looking directly at Peter. "Chloe doesn't have an income history that a bank would accept for a renovation line of credit." Peter stiffened. "We are helping her get established. It's a bridge loan. Once the business takes off, she'll refinance in her own name." I looked at Willow. She avoided my eyes, busying herself with a napkin. They had co-signed. They had put their names next to hers on a loan for a property they no longer owned, controlled by a woman who had never finished a project in her life. "You realize," I said, my voice low and steady, "that if she defaults, or if the vibes don't pay the mortgage the bank comes for you, they don't care about the vision." "You're always so negative," Willow sighed, finally looking at me with disappointment. "Why can't you just be happy for your sister? She's finally finding her path. You have everything, Megan. Let her have this." I looked at Chloe. She was smirking, a little triumphant tilt to her lips that said I won and you lost. She took a sip of the wine I had bought, in the house I helped maintain, holding the deed to the cottage I had restored. "I'm not negative, Mom," I said, standing up. The pain in my side was throbbing again. "I'm an architect. I know how structures fail. They fail when the foundation is rotten." I left before dessert. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it quietly. As I walked to my car, the cold night air biting at my cheeks, I replayed the conversation. They thought I was just jealous. They thought I was bitter. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. Years ago, when I first helped them buy that cottage as a distressed foreclosure, I had insisted on setting up the original title insurance and legal framework myself. I knew exactly who the lenders were. I knew the specific clauses in the terrifyingly high-interest bridge loans Peter favored. And I knew that my name was still listed as the emergency contact. I was 22, fresh out of college. I lived on ramen and worked double shifts at a drafting firm so I could send them checks to keep my entire adult life building a fortress of stability around my parents so they wouldn't have to worry. And their response was to strip mine that stability to feed Chloe's delusions. But the real danger wasn't just Chloe's incompetence. It was the person whispering in her ear. 2 months after the dinner, I began to see the social media posts. The renovations were underway. Walls were being smashed. Expensive imported tiles were being stacked in the driveway, and in every photo there was a man. His name was Julian. I looked him up immediately. He was tagged in Chloe's photos as her visionary partner and lead contractor. On the surface, he looked the part, handsome in a rugged, manufactured way, always wearing a pristine tool belt that looked like it had never seen sawdust. He described himself as a holistic space harmonizer. I dug deeper. It's amazing what you can find when you have a professional with access to family assets, convince them to launch lifestyle businesses, encourage them to take out massive loans for renovations that he would oversee, and then funnel the money into shell companies for materials that never arrived. Once the money ran dry, he would vanish, leaving the woman with a gutted house and insurmountable debt. He was a parasite, and Chloe, with her fresh deed and my parents' cosign loans, was his new host. I saw the photos of them at the cottage. Julian was pointing at the roof I had shingled. The caption read, "Tearing down the old to make way for the light. Julian says the energy here is stagnant. We're going full open concept." They weren't just renovating, they were destroying the load-bearing walls. I tried to intervene. I called Willow one Sunday morning. "Mom, who is this Julian guy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, isn't he wonderful?" Willow gushed. "He's helping Chloe so much. He has such big ideas. He says the cottage could be worth double once they're done." "Mom, he's not licensed," I said. "I checked the registry. If he touches the electric fall." If they wouldn't listen to me, I would have to let gravity take its course. But I wouldn't just watch. I was going to be ready to catch the pieces I wanted and let the rest shatter. The silence lasted for 6 months. 6 months of social media posts showing demo day parties where Chloe posed with a sledgehammer, looking like a fashion model in a war zone. 6 months of vague updates from my mother about permitting delays and supply chain issues. I watched from a distance, focusing on my own firm, securing 2 major commerci. Contracts that solidified my reputation in the city. I was building skyscrapers while they were digging their own graves. The notification didn't come with a bang. It arrived with a polite ding on my laptop on a rainy Thursday morning. Because I had never removed myself from the county clerk's automated notification system for the property address, a system I had subscribed to years ago to monitor tax assessments, I received the glass-walled conference room. She slid a thick file across the mahogany table. "It's ugly, Meg," Sarah said, tapping the file. "Vantage is a churn and burn lender. They don't want the property, they want the cash. They're looking to bundle this talk. You don't own the house. You own the right to foreclose on your sister." "I know exactly what I'm buying," I said. "I have the liquidity. My portfolio has been aggressive this year. I can cover the purchase of the debt at 60 cents on the dollar if they're desperate to sell." "They are," Sarah confirmed. "But why? Why become the bank?" "Because the bank just wants money." Peter's jagged scrawl, Willow's hesitant script. "I want control. If Vantage forecloses, they'll auction the house to strangers, and my parents will be on the hook for the deficiency judgment on their primary residence." House, from the outside, looked half-finished. That math didn't add up. Miller's report came back a week later, and it was the smoking gun I had been waiting for. Julian hadn't just mismanaged the funds, he had siphoned them. The materials were purchased from a shell company registered to Julian's cousin. The consulting fees were wired to an offshore account. I had the leverage, I had the trap. Now I just had to wait for them to step into it. The invitation to lunch came 3 weeks after I became the owner of their debt. It was Willow. Her text was uncharacteristically brief. "Please come over Sunday. Family meeting. Dad needs to talk to you." I dressed for the occasion. I wore my sharpest tailored blazer, the one I wore to site inspections when I needed contractors to know I wasn't there to make friends. I drove to my parents' house, their primary residence, the one they had unknowingly leveraged into jeopardy. The atmosphere inside was suffocating. The curtains were drawn. Peter sat at the head of the dining table, looking 10 years older than he had at the celebration dinner. Willow was pacing the kitchen. Chloe was there, too, curled up on the sofa, looking less like a lifestyle guru and more like a cornered animal. Julian was conspicuously absent. "Megan, thank you for coming," Peter said, his voice raspy. He didn't stand up to greet me. "Sit down." I sat, I didn't smile. "What's going on?" "We have a cash flow situation," Peter began, avoiding my eyes. He smoothed the tablecloth with trembling hands. "The renovations at the cottage have hit some snags, unforeseen structural issues. The damp proofing alone was $50,000. I knew for a fact that the damp proofing materials had cost $4,000. I had the receipts from the supply yard in Miller's folder, which currently rested in my bag. "And," I prompted. "And the bank is being unreasonable," Chloe piped up from the sofa, her voice shrill. "They don't understand the vision. They're demanding a balloon payment now just because we missed a few deadlines. It's predatory, Megan. They're trying to steal my business." "It's not just deadlines, Chloe," Peter said wearily. "We missed the payments. The interest rate adjusted and it ate up the reserves." He looked at me, his eyes watering. "Megan, we need a loan, just short-term, $20,000, just to get current with the lender so they call off the lawyers. We'll pay you back as soon as the cottage launches in the spring." I looked at them. They genuinely thought $20,000 would fix this. They were trying to put a Band-Aid on a severed artery. "I can't do that," I said calmly. "Can't," Willow snapped, stopping her pacing. "Or won't. We know you just landed that downtown high-rise contract, Megan. We saw it in the paper. You have the money." "I have the money," I admitted. "But I won't give it to you, because it won't go to the bank. It will go to Julian." "Don't bring him into this," Chloe yelled, sitting up. "Julian is working his ass off. He's out there right now trying to find private investors to save us." "Is he?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a flight manifest. "Because according to this, Julian is currently on a flight to Chelum. One way. He left this morning." The room went deathly silent. Chloe's face drained of color. "That's a lie," she whispered. He's meeting an investor in Miami." "He's gone, Chloe," I said, my voice hard. "And he took the last draw of the loan with him. I checked the account transfers. Thursday morning, $10,000 moved to a crypto exchange. Then he vanished." "You're lying," Chloe screamed, standing up. "You're just trying to ruin everything because you're jealous. Dad, tell her to stop." Peter looked at me, then at the paper on the table. He picked it up with shaking fingers. "Megan, how do you know this?" "Because I investigated him," I said. "Something you should have done before you co-signed a loan with a con artist." "He's not a con artist." Chloe was sobbing now, hysterical. "He loves me. We're building an empire." "You're building a ruin," I said. "And you've dragged Mom and Dad into the rubble with you." "Get out," Willow hissed. She was standing behind Peter, her hands gripping his shoulders. "If you aren't here to help, get out. We don't need your cruelty. We need family." "I am trying to help you understand the reality," I said, standing up. "The reality is that you are in default. The bank isn't going to wait. The foreclosure notice has already been filed." "We know that," Peter shouted, finally slamming his hand on the table. "That's why we asked for the money. If you won't help us, we lose the cottage." "You've already lost the cottage, Dad," I said, walking to the door. The question now is whether you lose this house too. We won't, Chloe sneered through her tears. Julian will fix it. He'll call me when he lands, you'll see. I paused at the door. If he calls, ask him why he bought a ticket under the name Marcus Thorne. That's his real name, and he has 3 warrants for fraud in Nevada. I walked out, leaving them in the chaos of the truth. They didn't believe me yet. They were still clinging to the lie because the truth was too expensive to afford. The week following the confrontation was a slow-motion car crash. I didn't answer Chloe's manic texts, which ranged from begging for money to accusing me of fabricating the flight manifest. Instead, I focused on the legal process. As Foundational Assets, LLC, I instructed my lawyer to proceed with the acceleration clause. We sent the formal demand letter. The full amount of the loan, $215,000 with penalties and interest, was due immediately. This was the point where the antagonist usually tries to regain control. Chloe's attempt was pathetic. She went to the cottage, which I knew from my pie was now a half-demolished shell with tarps for a roof, and filmed a tearful video for her followers. She claimed she was the victim of contractor fraud and toxic family dynamics. She started a GoFundMe to save the sanctuary. It raised $40 before I flagged it for terms of service violations regarding the factual accuracy of her claims. But the real escalation happened with my parents. Peter showed up at my office 3 days after the demand letter arrived. He looked like a ghost. He was wearing a suit that hung loosely on his frame. "Megan," he said, standing in the lobby of my firm, "we got a letter from a company called Foundational Assets. They're demanding the full amount. They're threatening to place a lien on our home." I ushered him into my office and closed the blinds. "I know how these companies work, Dad. They don't bluff." "We can't pay it," he whispered, sinking into the guest chair. "We don't have it. Julian," "You were right. Chloe can't reach him. The police said it's a civil matter unless we can prove theft, and the money was voluntarily signed over to him." He put his head in his hands. "We're going to lose everything. The house, your mother's garden, everything." "Where is Chloe?" I asked. "She's at home. She's not doing well. She still thinks there's a way to save the cottage. She wants us to take a reverse mortgage on our house to pay off the loan." I stared at him. Even now, facing ruin, Chloe was willing to cannibalize their last asset to save her ego. "And are you considering it?" Peter looked up, tears in his eyes. "What choice do we have? If we don't pay, they take the house anyway. At least this way. Maybe Chloe can turn it around." That was the breaking point. They were still willing to set themselves on fire to keep Chloe warm. They were going to sign a reverse mortgage, essentially selling their future, to pay off a debt that I owned. "No," I said firmly. "Do not sign anything. Do not talk to any lenders." "Then what do?" he cried. "We need stability, Megan. We need someone to stop this." "I can stop it," I said. I walked over to my desk and unlocked the drawer. I pulled out the thick binder I had prepared. It contained the deed of trust, the assignment of the debt note, and the incorporation papers for Foundational Assets, LLC. I placed the binder in front of him. "I need you to look at this, Dad." He opened the binder, confused. He read the first page, then the second. He stopped when he saw my signature at the bottom of the assignment agreement. "Foundational Assets," he murmured. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with confusion. "Megan, you are Foundational Assets." "I bought the debt, Dad," I said. "I bought the note from the bank last month. I am the lender. I am the one foreclosing on the cottage." He stood up, his face flushing red. "You're doing this. You sent that letter threatening to take our house." "I sent the letter to establish the legal reality," I said, my voice unwavering. "If I hadn't bought it, Vantage Capital would have already sold your house at auction." I stepped in to stop the bleeding. "You're foreclosing on your sister," he shouted. "You own the debt and you're still pushing us." "I am foreclosing on the asset to strip the debt," I corrected him. "And I'm doing it to ensure that Chloe never, ever touches a deed again." Cancel it, he demanded. Just forgive the debt, Megan, your family, tear up the paper. Give your sister a clean slate. No, I said. If I tear up this paper, Chloe owns a $200,000 asset free and clear, an asset she destroyed. And she learns nothing. She will leverage it again within 6 months. She will find another Julian. So what do you want? He asked, his voice trembling with anger. You want to humiliate her. I want the deed, I said. I want Chloe off the title. I want you off the loans. I am going to foreclose, take legal possession of the cottage, and evict Chloe. That is the only way this ends without you and Mom living in a shelter. She'll never forgive you, Peter whispered. I know, I said, but she won't be homeless, and neither will you. That's the stability you asked for. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Send in the notary, please. Peter looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. He realized, finally, that the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I wasn't the daughter asking for approval anymore. I was the institution granting the mercy. The deadline I had set for the deed in lieu of foreclosure was Friday at 5:00 p.m. If they signed the property over to Foundational Assets, LLC voluntarily, the debt would be forgiven and my parents' home would be safe. If they didn't, I would file the final writ of possession Monday morning. I expected a quiet surrender. I expected Peter to talk sense into them. Instead, on Friday afternoon, I received a notification on my phone. It was a Facebook Live alert from Chloe. Title: Manifesting Justice, a gathering of light against corporate greed. I clicked the link. The video showed Chloe standing on the deck of the half-ruined cottage. She had hung fairy lights over the exposed beams where the roof used to be. There were people there, maybe 30 of them. Family, friends, neighbors from the lake, a few of her influencer acquaintances. They were drinking wine and holding signs that said "Save the Sanctuary" and "People over Profits." We are here, Chloe was shouting into a microphone, wearing a flowing white dress that dragged in the sawdust. To stand. D against the soulless vulture capitalists trying to steal our family's legacy. They think they can bully us. They think they can take what is ours just because of a few missed payments. No, we are manifesting a miracle today. My blood ran cold. She wasn't just ignoring the legal reality. She was weaponizing our community against me, unaware that I was the target she was painting. I grabbed my keys. I didn't call Peter. I didn't call my lawyer. I drove. The drive to the lake usually took an hour. I made it in 40 minutes. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the absurdity of the scene hit me. The sanctuary looked like a bomb site decorated for a prom. The structural damage was worse than the photos suggested. The entire north wall was missing, covered only by a blue tarp that flapped violently in the wind. I slammed my car door. The sound cut through the ambient, chill music blasting from a portable speaker. Heads turned. I saw Mrs. Higgins, my third-grade teacher. I saw the Millers, who had known us since I was a baby. I saw my parents. Peter was sitting in a folding chair, looking like a man awaiting execution. Willow was fluttering around, refilling glasses, looking terrified but trying to keep up appearances. Chloe was on the makeshift stage, a stack of pallets. She saw me and her face lit up with a twisted kind of triumph. "And look," she announced, pointing a manicured finger at me. "My sister has finally arrived. Maybe she's finally here to stand with us instead of judging us. Everyone, this is Megan, the skeptic. But today, she's going to see the power of community." The crowd clapped politely. They didn't know. I walked straight through the crowd. I didn't make eye contact with the neighbors. I walked up to the pallets, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. I stopped 3 feet from Chloe. "Shut it down, Chloe," I said, my voice low but carrying in the sudden silence. "Megan, don't start," she hissed, leaning down with the microphone still in her hand. "We have investors here, potential donors. Don't ruin the vibe." "There are no investors," I said, stepping onto the pallet. I turned to face the crowd. I saw the confusion on their faces. There is no sanctuary, there is only a foreclosure. "Get off the stage," Chloe shrieked, trying to body block me. You don't own this place. Actually, I said, pulling the deed transfer documents from my jacket pocket, I do. Or rather, the company that owns the debt does, and I am the company. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Peter put his head in his hands. Willow stopped pouring wine, the bottle freezing in midair. What are you talking about? Chloe laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. You're an architect, Megan, you're not a bank. Stop trying to make everything about you. I bought the note, Chloe, I said, raising my voice so the back row could hear. When you defaulted, when you stopped paying the mortgage for 6 months to fund your trips to Chalum, when you let Julian strip the copper wiring out of the walls to sell for scrap. I bought the debt to stop the bank from taking Mom and Dad's house. Liar, Chloe screamed. She lunged for the papers, but I stepped back. I have the flight manifests, I continued, relentless. I have the bank transfers showing the renovation budget going to a crypto wallet in the Caymans, and I have the foreclosure order. I turned to the crowd, to the neighbors who had been fed a diet of lies for months. My parents co-signed a loan for $200,000. That money is gone. This house is condemned. And the only reason the sheriff isn't here right now to padlock the gate is because I am the one holding the paperwork. Mrs. Higgins gasped. The Millers exchanged horrified looks. The influencers were already putting their phones away, sensing the content had turned from inspiring to cringe. Mom, Dad, Chloe turned to them, her face crumbling. Tell her she's lying, tell them about the vision. Peter stood up. It was a slow, painful movement, like an old tree finally creaking before it falls. He walked over to the stage. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Chloe. It's true, Peter said. His voice was broken. Megan owns the debt. We saw the papers. And you let her do this, Chloe wailed, the tears starting now, angry, ugly tears. You let her humiliate me. You humiliated yourself, Chloe, I said softly. You threw a party on a sinking ship. I slapped the folder onto a folding table next to the wine. The deadline is 5:00 p.m. It is 4:55 p.m. You sign the deed over to me and I forgive the debt. Mom and Dad keep their house. You walk away with nothing, but you walk away clean, or you don't sign. I foreclose Monday. The bank takes Mom and Dad's house to cover the difference. And I sue you personally for fraud regarding the misuse of construction funds. The silence that stretched across the yard was heavy enough to crush lungs. The wind whipped the blue tarp, a lonely, snapping sound. Chloe looked at the crowd. They were looking at her not with admiration, but with pity. The illusion had shattered. The visionary was just a grifter who had been caught. Mom, Chloe whimpered. Willow walked over. I expected her to defend Chloe. I braced for it. But Willow looked at the ruins of the cottage, really looked at it for the first time, seeing the rot instead of the potential. She looked at Peter, defeated and gray. Sign the papers, Chloe, Willow whispered. But... Sign them, Willow screamed, a sudden, shocking burst of rage that made everyone jump. It's over. The money is gone. Julian is gone. Sign the papers before you lose us our home. Chloe trembled. She looked at me with pure hatred. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly she tore the paper slightly as she signed. She threw the pen at me. I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted. You always wanted to be the only one who mattered. I didn't want to be the only one who mattered, I said, picking up the folder. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't the only one paying for your mistakes. I turned to the crowd. The party is over. Please leave the property. It's a construction site, and the insurance doesn't cover guests. As the cars drove away, kicking up dust, I stood alone on the deck of the house that was finally, legally, mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. But for the first time in years, the foundation under my feet felt solid. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Chloe didn't speak to me for a year. She moved into a studio apartment 3 towns over, a place she had to pay for herself by working as a receptionist at a dental office. The lifestyle brand was scrubbed from the internet the day after the party. Without the cottage as a backdrop and the family money as a fuel source, the illusion evaporated. My parents were a different story. For the first few months, things were cold. They were safe. Their home was no longer at risk, but they carried the heavy, silent shame of people who had been forced to see their own favoritism weaponized against them. They had lost the dream of Chloe, the golden child, and were left with the reality of Megan, the savior they hadn't wanted to need. I didn't push them. I didn't visit for Sunday dinners. I focused on the cottage. I spent the next 8 months restoring it. I didn't hire a visionary. I hired a licensed crew I had worked with for a decade. We tore down the rotting additions. We reinforced the load-bearing walls. We put on a new roof, slate, not tarps. I designed it not as a retreat center, but as a family home. A place built to last. When it was finished, late on a crisp October afternoon, I invited Peter and Willow out. They parked in the driveway, hesitant. The cottage glowed in the twilight. The warm light spilled out of the new windows, illuminating the sturdy oak porch. It wasn't flashy. It was solid. It was beautiful. I met them at the door. "Come in." They walked through the rooms in silence. Willow ran her hand over the granite countertops. Peter inspected the joinery on the staircase. They saw the quality. They saw the care. We ended up in the living room, standing in front of the stone fireplace where a fire was already crackling. It's incredible, Megan," Peter said, his voice thick. "Better than it ever was." "It's up to code," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "And it's solvent, no liens, no debt." Willow sat down on the sofa, the same spot where she had once told me to stop being jealous. She looked older, frailer. "We owe you an apology," she said. She didn't look at me, she looked at the fire. "Not just for the house, for the hospital." "You don't have to," I started, but Peter interrupted. "Yes, we do," he said firmly. He turned to me, his eyes clear. "We thought helping Chloe was our job. We thought because you were strong, you didn't need us. We punished you for your competence." "I didn't need your money, Dad," I said quietly. "I just needed to know I was worth protecting too." Peter nodded, tears spilling onto his cheeks. "I know, and I am sorry. We almost lost everything trying to protect the wrong thing. You saved us, even when we didn't deserve it." I reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, the hand of a man who had worked hard but made bad choices. "I'm renting the place out starting next month," I said, shifting the tone before the emotion overwhelmed us. "To a nice family, long-term lease. The income will cover the taxes and maintenance with a little profit left over." I pulled a check from my pocket. It was for $5,000, the first installment of the profit. "This is for you," I said, handing it to Peter. "For your retirement fund, since the nest egg took a hit." Peter stared at the check. "Megan, we can't take this. You own the house." "I do," I said, "but you're my parents, and I take care of my investments. That includes you." He took the check, his hands shaking. It wasn't a bailout this time. It was a dividend from the stability I had built. We didn't hug. We weren't a hugging family, not really. But we drank coffee by the fire, and for the first time, the silence wasn't filled with resentment. It was filled with peace. As I drove home that night, leaving the cottage standing strong against the coming winter, I thought about Chloe. I heard she was doing well, actually. She had been promoted to office manager. She was paying her own rent. She had blocked me on social media, but Mom said she was quieter, more grounded. My foreclosure hadn't destroyed her. It had forced her to find her own feet instead of standing on mine. I turned onto the highway, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I had lost the version of my family I thought I wanted, the one where I was blindly loved. But I had built a new one based on truth, boundaries, and the unshakable knowledge that if the roof ever caved in again, I wouldn't be the one waiting to be rescued. I would be the one holding the hammer.